Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to walk you through the process of making one of these Kinetic cabinets. This was the second video I ever put on this channel and it took off almost immediately. And it even did some impressive numbers over on Instagram. Since putting that video out, I've had close to 1,000 DMs and emails asking me for drawings. So that's what this video is going to be about. If you go into the description of this video, you'll see a link to my website where the drawings are for sale. For $10, you get two sets of drawings, one in imperial and one in metric. Everything you need, from specific dimensions to links to all the materials and hardware I used in this video, are in these drawings, which go hand in hand with this video. It's much easier to explain something with words than it is to write it down and hope you get your point across. So if that's something that interests you, go and grab those and come on back so I can walk you through it. In an attempt to not bore you to death at the start of the video, I pre-cut all these pieces. Right here, what you're looking at is everything you need to build this cabinet, minus a couple of small pieces, which we'll get into later in the video. We are going to start with what is eventually the frame for this whole project, the foundation, also known as the carcass. The four walls and backer of any cabinet are referred to as the carcass, or skeleton, which is why it is very important to take your time on this part and make sure it's flat and square, because this is going to set the tone for the rest of the project. What you see me doing here is called checking the diagonals. You basically measure corner to corner on each side and the measurement should be the same, and if it is the same, that means you have a square piece. This works on any piece of furniture or cabinet that is a square or a rectangle. While that carcass is drying, I'm going to move on to shelves and the shelf supports that go on the side walls. For anyone new to woodworking, this is called a dado. It's when you put a slot in the center of a board. What you saw a few moments ago on the carcass of the cabinet, those are called rabbet joints. That's when they're at the edge of the board. I'd say rabbets and dados are the most used joints in woodworking and some of the most important. This cabinet is not that big, so I like to do thinner shelves. Personally, it gives it a more streamlined look, but you can do whatever you'd like for the thickness of these. It's kind of self-explanatory. You make the slot, you make the shelf that fits. Now back to the cabinet. When you make these, the only rule really is that it has to be exactly twice as tall as it is wide. So if you make it 1 foot wide, it has to be 2 foot tall. I call these ledgers. They're called nailing boards traditionally, but I've never nailed furniture to the wall, so in my eyes, these are called ledgers. As you saw a moment ago, I just measured these ledgers in place for length. I call that the Larry Hahn method. He's a house builder from the 80s who used to measure things by putting them in place and making a mark, as opposed to pulling your tape measure out when it's not necessary. Here I'm just putting some angles on these ledgers so that they have a little visual appeal to them and they're not just straight across the back. There's many ways to add flair to these, so do it as you please. I've done live edge on a few of these and they turned out pretty cool. Be sure when you're putting these ledgers onto the cabinet, you apply glue liberally, and I don't mean with a bad attitude, I mean volume-wise. You want a ton of glue on these. These are going to take a lot of the force, and they are the contact point between the cabinet and the wall. These two triangle pieces were not in the original shot with all of the wood that this project requires. These are to just expand the space where you're going to be putting your threaded inserts for the pivot points on the top and the bottom panels of the door. This just gives you a little more room when you're putting your threaded inserts in, and a little more beef around the threaded inserts. There's beef again. I don't know why I keep saying beef in these videos. Again, substantial glue in these corners is going to be beneficial. It's going to give it strength because the doors pivot off of these two corners. Now it's on to the door. Laying the door out is pretty simple. You measure down from the top, dead center 2 lines so you're parallel. Once you connect those 2 lines, you should have 2 perfectly even duplicated squares. Now once you cut your panel in half and you have your 2 squares, you're going to start cutting your triangle portions out. The hinges, I believe, are 3/16 in width when they're folded up, when the door is going to sit resting and closed. And I believe the blade is just over 1/16 in my saw. So that leaves us with 1/8 of an inch on the top and the bottom that need to be trimmed off because of these hinges bumping those 2 panels away further than the blade. This, I would argue, is the trickiest part of the whole build, is getting these triangles the correct size and straight. And as for the 2 smaller triangles, I usually just measure halfway between the 2 corners on the bottom edge and 2 corners on the right edge for both. And that usually looks pretty good. Pro tip for you, get some low-tack tape and label your door panels so you know where they go. Even though it's pretty straightforward how the grain lines up, just make it easier on yourself, because I've messed these up pretty bad before. There was one where the bottom square was horizontal grain and the top was vertical. I believe that one is still up on my Instagram somewhere, so if you want to go point and laugh, feel free. Just don't scroll through my reels. It's a little dark over there sometimes. So if you're unfamiliar, these are called piano hinges, and I got them from Home Depot, and I did that intentionally. I tried to get everything from either Home Depot or Amazon for this, so it's easy access for everybody, because generally, you can find a Home Depot in any city. So what you see me doing here is compensating for the thickness of the blade and the difference between that and the thickness of the hinges. I'm extending the lines from these 2 trapezoid pieces in the center to these smaller triangles. These are the lines we're going to follow to get a straight edge. This, I would argue, is the trickiest part of the whole build, is getting these triangles the correct size and straight. I, for some reason, chose the trickier method of laying it out flat on the table. But for the larger triangles you'll see here in a moment, I do lay it out on the cabinet and trim it right off. And I suggest you do the same if you're lacking confidence at all in this part of the process. And if you're concerned enough, you can take it a step further and use some scrap plywood to actually mock up the doors. You can take the dimensions from the drawing and just make sure it all works out before you pull out the hardwood. Pause. I'd like to know if I'm alone on this one, but when I'm at work or I'm in the shop, I like to listen to other people building things or talking about building things, and I've been told that's weird. Does anybody else do that? Let me know in the comments. am marking and trimming off the bottom of that triangle on the lower door panel, and this is definitely the way to do it. Now when it comes to precision on these cabinets, I'd say making sure your cabinet is square is number one, and the second most important thing to pay attention to is the placement of these two pivot holes in the corners. Now what I didn't show you here before I started laying out the corner pivot points in these two door panels is before you do this, you have to make sure the gap between your top and lower panel is where you want it to be. Make sure you give yourself enough room here either way, because this is where the door is going to pinch and bind, and it's really going to give you trouble if you don't give yourself enough space. Before you drill them, you have to make sure your door is sitting perfectly on the cabinet the way you want it to look when the project is finished. And make sure the hole is in the same spot on the top and bottom panel, because this will affect how the door operates and how it sits when it's open. In these two corners, I'm using exposed furniture bolts. There is another method, however, where you can hide these and it'll just be a small hole where you put an Allen key through. It's a method I used in my Kinetic watch box video, which I will leave a link to on the screen. What I'm doing here is taking the trapezoid out of each door, and I'm beveling the underside of two edges, and you can see the edges here in the video. These are the points where it binds normally. If you put a bevel on these, they slide past each other pretty easily. Moving on to the center triangles. This is called a spline jig. I'm using it in this case to make a few kerfs. A kerf is the amount of material removed by a saw blade. I'm going to move it around a little bit and make it a couple of saw blades wide so that there's space. That space is for the mending plate, which attaches the top and bottom panels together, and it's the third pivot point on this piece. Next, we're marking the holes for the doorknob and binding post. You'll see what the binding post is near the end of the video. I believe I bought it after everything was finished. Time to inlay some magnets. If this jig looks complicated to you, it isn't. The dimensions are in the drawings, and it's pretty straightforward regardless. You don't even need to make the jig, honestly, if you're okay with a router. Rectangle magnet, rectangle hole. Make sure you go deep enough, because I did not on this initial mock-up, so I had to pull these magnets out and go a 1/16 deeper. This is a knob I had sitting around, and I don't know where I got it, so I linked a super similar knob in the drawings. And what I'm doing is just matching the corner curve of these two inside triangles to that radius. This, like the backs of the trapezoids where I beveled, is another point of contention for the door, and it's stuck on me before, so I found that rounding these over just takes that out of the mix. This is 1/8 inch thick steel, and I'm going to use it to make the mending plate. When you do this part, make sure to use a drill press with the appropriate clamps and all of that, because, this is just fatherless behavior. If you'll notice when I walk away, there's a lot of damage done to the table, and it's definitely not from it grabbing my drill. If you don't already have one, I'd highly suggest you get one of these small belt sanders from Harbor Freight. I use it, I think, more than any tool in the shop minus the miter saw, and they're very affordable. Now we're moving on to the doorstop. It's essentially a place to put a steel bar so that the door magnets have a place to grab and hold. I also inlay a piece of 1/8 inch steel into the stile of the cabinet where the doorstop meets the cabinet body. And if you didn't know, the vertical members of a cabinet or a door are referred to as the stiles, and the horizontal members are referred to as the rails. Handrails, for the most part, are always horizontal, so that's how I remember which is which. Now on top of the magnets into the side of the pieces, I also inlay some on the back for extra rigidity and strength. It's nice to have pulling power in 2 directions. It really holds the door in the right place when it's closed.
Move the light, we can't see.
I'm sure I move it here in a minute.
You can't even see.
It's a good point. Ah, there we go. This is called 2P10. It is a Ca glue, which stands for cyanoacrylate, and what it does is it bonds most surfaces together, as long as it has a place to go. So when it comes to the metal magnets, you see me scratching the back with, I believe, 80 grit sandpaper. This creates crevices for the glue to squeeze into and then harden, and it bonds them together, and it's very hard to remove them. And one final note about the magnets that you put in the sides of the smaller triangles. Make sure that they are facing out in a direction where they are attracted to each other. If their poles are switched when you put them in, you're going to have to take them out, because when you open the door, they will not grab each other and hold the door in a nice position so it looks good when it's opened. It's almost time for finish. First, we have to make sure everything's operating properly and everything is correct. I would suggest clamping it in an upright position and testing the door standing like it will be on the wall. This is Varathane oil-based polyurethane. I'm a big film finish guy. I like a nice sheen, and Rubio does not get there for me, so this is what I prefer. But use whatever you'd like. This is the binding post I had mentioned earlier. I've only seen it in 3/4 inch lengths at Home Depot, and in order for it to work on this piece, we have to shave some down on the belt sander. Go nice and slow on this part, take your time, because you can melt this aluminum. After 4 coats of finish, we're ready to reassemble the cabinet for its final time, hopefully. I ended up painting the binding post and the 1/8 inch steel pieces so that they match the hinges and doorknob. This is paste wax. I use it wherever there's movement in these projects, and it works pretty well, and you can reapply over time. That, in combination with this nylon washer, this door opens pretty smooth. I cut these two little triangles with magnets in the back to hide the screws inside the cabinet. I believe this was rosewood. Now is a good time to announce that I'm giving this piece away. The rules for the giveaway are at the end of this video, so pause the screen if you're interested and get involved. I hope that was helpful and insightful enough, and if not, feel free to DM me on Instagram, send me an email. The email is in the description of this video, and I will gladly help anybody and everybody. And if you bought the drawings, I appreciate you dearly. Thank you, love you, goodbye. Say it back.